the Macron government, which has been in power for 18 months, has unleashed police violence of a type that hasn't been seen in France since the Algerian War.
There weren't a lot of people who could communicate in English the way he could across the ocean, on a weekly basis with his weekly banners telling us what the feelings were of Syrian people.
Hello, my name is Stanley Heller. Welcome to The Struggle. We'll begin with some good news. In a historic move, the Senate voted to use the War Powers Act to try to rein in the president in an unauthorized war. The Senate voted to get the U.S. out of the Saudi war against Yemen. It's been going on since 2013. However, it's unlikely that the House will vote on the measure in this calendar year. The Senate also voted unanimously to declare that Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, had authorized the murder of journalist and American resident Jamal Khashoggi. The Saudi regime may be seeing the writing on the wall. They've agreed to a truce in the Yemen war in the city of Hodeidah. Fighters will withdraw from the city and the Saudis will stop bombing. Keep up the pressure, particularly on those institutions that are assisting the Saudi government. MIT did a review of its work with the Saudis after a lot of pressure and demonstrations. They didn't change their activity, but it's a start. But there's plenty other institutions that are going merrily along, and they need some vociferous protest. An op-ed in the New York Times today said there are 2,600 political prisoners in Saudi Arabia, including many feminist leaders. Feminist organizations in the United States should be speaking out, particularly after the news that some of these feminist leaders are being tortured. Now is one of the organizations that ought to be approached and asked to take a stand. Of course, insist on the return of the remains of Jamal Khashoggi. Now news from Palestine.
It's been a deadly 24 hours in the West Bank. 2 Israelis died today when a Palestinian gunman opened fire at a bus stop. This came just hours after Israeli troops carried out several deadly raids, killing 3 Palestinians in the West Bank. Meanwhile, in Gaza, hundreds of Palestinians attended a funeral Wednesday for a 4-year-old boy who died after being hit by Israeli shrapnel. Ahmed Abu Abed was injured while attending the Great March of Return protest along with his father, Yasir, who was shot during the demonstration.
We were 300 meters away. They were shooting and 2 were injured before I was. Then an explosion happened in front of us. After that, I got injured. Then my son did, and the people removed him from the area and then removed me.
More than 195 Palestinians have been killed by Israeli forces since the Great March of Return rallies began on March 30th.
Activists have not yet been able to reverse the firing by CNN of Mark Lamont Hill for his remarks where he called for justice and one state in Palestine from the river to the sea. But there is this news.
Temple University has said it will not take action against media studies professor Mark Lamont Hill, who was recently fired from CNN after he gave a speech in support of Palestinian rights at the United Nations.
And before we leave democracy now, this startling statistic.
New data from the Centers for Disease Control shows the rate of gun deaths in the United States has reached a 20-year high. According to the CDC, almost 40,000 people were killed in shootings in 2017. That's an average of over 100 shooting deaths a day. 60% of the shooting deaths were suicides.
Staggering. By the way, the suicide rate in Great Britain from guns is 1/50th that of the USA. Now France, where the Yellow Vest movement has engaged 100,000 people for over a month. This is from an interview I did with Richard Greeman. He's a retired academic and an activist who lives most of the year in France. He did an article in New Politics about the Yellow Vests. I contacted him. Here's part of our interview.
So in the corporate media, we see reports of Yellow Vest violence in Paris, but your article describes something very differently. How would you categorize what's going on?
Well, what's happened in France is that the Macron government, which has been in power for 18 months, has unleashed police violence of a type that hasn't been seen in France since the Algerian War. It's quite extraordinary. France has the reputation for having big, demonstrations and so on, and the farmers often go in with their tractors and the labor unions, but they're usually tolerated. And here, Macron has quite deliberately unleashed militarized police, and the media coverage in France and elsewhere blames the violence on the protesters. In fact, there's been a certain amount of cars set on fire and shop windows broken, but the majority of the violence, including hundreds of people seriously injured, and a lady killed. She was on her balcony in Marseille, an Arab lady, and of 80 years, and they hit her in the head with a flashball, which killed her. She died later in the hospital, and you could see on videos dozens of people there clearly aiming at people's heads and faces with the tear gas and the flashballs and all the rest. And this has been a massive unleashing of political violence.
The whole interview is up on our YouTube channel, Struggle Video Media. The celebrated Marxist Richard Wolff spoke about the Yellow Vests on Jamrel Thomas's Progressive Soapbox. This is an excerpt.
The richest people got the bailout, and all the rest of us got austerity. And I think the mass of people in the world, they understand they've been taken for a real big ride here.
Yes.
They've suffered a system that whacked them with a crash. Then they've watched the people who brought the crash get the big bailouts from the government. And then they were told the same government that just bailed out the richest people has to deliver austerity to you. Whoa, it's too much. You've been kicked one time too many. And I think what you're seeing is, first, people began to vote for folks. They voted for socialists because the socialists said, we'll fight against it. The socialists got elected. They didn't do crap. They didn't fight the austerity. They administered it. You see it in Greece with Syriza. You saw it with France with Hollande. So then they went the other way. Okay, you socialists punked out on us. We're going to vote for right-wingers. And they did that with Trump. And they did that in a way with Brexit. And they did that with the Italian government a few months ago. But guess what? The right wing is no better able to deal with this problem than the left wing. And here comes the importance of Paris and of France. 10 days ago, all the political parties were doing their usual political struggle. But the mass of the French people, having tried the left with Hollande and the Socialist Party and being disgusted, and then having voted for this Macron, and being disgusted. They said to themselves, we've had it. We will not accept this system. We will not accept that the political parties are the only way to go because they have betrayed us. First the left and then the right. And so this is the anger of the mass of people saying, we're not going to be put off. We're not going to play parliamentary games. We're not even going to work with the regular parties. We're going to go into the street and we're going to tell the people who run this society, you either change or nothing is going to happen here. There's not going to be any truck in the road. There's not going to be any gas in your tank. It's over, Jackson, because in the end, the people have the power. They always did, but they weren't ready to make the fight. And as has happened now several times, the country that leads the way is the French. They get out in the street. They understand where the political game ends and what their own responsibility is. So using Facebook and Twitter and WhatsApp and all the others, they are talking to each other, left-wingers, right-wingers, people who haven't been political at all. They're wearing those yellow jackets that are required in the French law. If you have a car, you have to keep one of those jackets in the trunk. So everybody has a yellow jacket, perfect uniform. They're in the street, and they're saying to everybody, we're going to make the change that everybody else promised but didn't deliver.
On December 12th, MEC and PEP had a program on Syria featuring a memorial to two Syrian activists who had been recently assassinated in Idlib, Raed Fares and Hamoud Janid. They were famous for the many protest banners and art that they created in their town of Kafaranbol. We started with slides of many of the banners they made. These are a couple. Dylan Connor, who had met Raed, spoke.
Yeah, I'm just going to talk a little bit about Raed Fares and my meeting with him, and a little bit about my experience in Syria. So for those of you who don't know me, my name is Dylan Connor. I'm married to a Syrian woman named Reem Hariri. She grew up in Damascus. Her family is originally from Daraa. And I went to Syria in 2007 and 2009 for extended family visits. We had an amazing time. I fell in love with the country and with the people. And so obviously when the revolution started in 2011 in Daraa, with the first siege of the revolution being in Daraa, I became very involved and very interested and plugged right in as much as I could to making my community here aware of what was happening there, and I've been doing that ever since. I'm also a songwriter, so I started to kind of put forth my anger, my pain into those songs and releasing those songs. In 2014, I went to Turkey, to the southern border of Turkey, to a school called Al Salam School. And it was right on the border with Syria. You could essentially see Syria across the way from where we were. And this was a school for all refugee. This is a school for all refugee children from Syria. And another beautiful thing about it was that all the teachers were Syrian refugee teachers as well. And this school was employing them. And it was a beautiful project. And I was there as a music mentor. We brought a team of 30 international people to kind of just try to give these kids like a summer camp experience, with everything from ping pong to basketball to welcome, ahlan wa sahlan. Kif Khan.
Hi, how are you?
Hi. We had photography classes, music classes. We had trauma specialists there. Really just like an enrichment program for these kids. Because we all know that so many of the Syrian kids just had not had an education for years and not had any fun. not had that opportunity to play, and every child should be able to play. So that's what we were there doing. And one night when I was there, Raed Faris came to visit us, the group that I was with. He was friends with the head of the program, whose name Lena Sergi. And so I was excited that Raed was there because he was already a hero to me with his messages from Kafranbel to the West. There weren't a lot of people who could communicate in English the way he could across the ocean, on a weekly basis with his weekly banners telling us what the feelings were of Syrian people there. And that was so important to me, and I really felt like he became a friend, although we had never met. So I met him that night. It was like meeting a celebrity, and I was excited because I had this new CD of songs that I had written for Syria. It was called Blood Like Fire Songs for Syria, and I knew Raed had a radio station, and so that was kind of my in with him to say, hey, I have this music for Syria. I'd love if you could play it. And he's like, of course I'll play it. I'd love to play this. This is awesome. And I, in fact, had one song that was called Not a Civil War. The refrain of the song is, this is not a civil war, it's a revolution. And that was a phrase that Raed would use, paraphrasing that. He would kind of get to that same point a lot. This is not a civil war, this is a revolution, this is our revolution. And so I was like, look at the name of this song, I think you'll like it. And he, anyway, he was just a fantastic, funny, but powerful man to be in the presence of. And so one of the things he did was, we were talking about he had been shot already. They had tried to kill him already. And he lifted up his shirt, and he showed me just his body riddled with scars from where they had shot him before. And he laughed about it. And he wasn't scared. And he was definitely going to go back. He wasn't going to be scared out of his home. It's just one of those beautiful nights. The air was beautiful. It kind of felt, like that Syrian air at night when the sun goes down and the energy comes out of the ground and people are sitting around smoking hookah and having tea. We were all doing that together, and I had the opportunity to meet him. And anyway, so we made a connection. And so since then, we started communicating over Facebook Messenger, and he would send me videos and things. Maybe you could write about this, maybe you could write about that. And so we started having a dialogue, which was a real honor for me. And in 2015, I don't know if you remember this, there was a liberation of Idlib. Basically, the rebels were able to push out the regime forces. And I was thinking to myself, how did that happen? Like, how did the rebels manage to push them out? And I immediately messaged Raed, and actually can share with you what he said. I said, is the liberation of Idlib a real liberation? I'd love to know your thoughts. He said, hey, to be honest, I don't think it's a real liberation. There's something mysterious in this story. I said, okay, you have my attention. What kind of mystery? He said, I think the regime gave the area to these people. I don't have evidence. So, anyway, conversations like that. And just kind of him being one of my point people for knowing what the heck's going on. Just like we heard from Rania, it's like amazing what she has been through and what she's seen and her reality when she's in Syria. And so anyway, when Rania was talking about one of the best days of her life, those huge protests in Idlib just in September, I was just so brought back to life as well, because I've always believed in the Syrian revolution since day one. And a lot of people were talking about it's over. I don't know, even some of my dearest people, friends, family in the revolution, like, well, that revolution's gone. I don't know what you're talking about anymore. We just need to save lives. And so I started being quiet about my revolutionary love or philosophy of revolution or being behind the revolution. And then when I saw these protests happen in Idlib in September, there it was again. There were hundreds of thousands of people, it looked like, out in the streets. I don't know what the count was, but it was just a sea of people. And they were demanding what they had demanded in 2011. And I was just so inspired by that. Like, yes, I'm not alone, you know? And I think so much of this is we need to feel like we're not alone in our desire for a free Syria and a democratic Syria. And so those protests really inspired me. So I wrote a song. It just happened. When these things happen, I get really emotional. I just write a song. It usually happens very quickly. And so, of course, one of the first people that I think of are the people who talked to me over the years, and Raed Faris was one of them with his signs. And so the first person I thought to sing of was him. So he was the first part of the verse of the song. And then the second or third person or so was Rania, because I had seen Rania, and I didn't know her at all. I just saw her out there chanting and yelling and speaking in English, and I could understand what she was saying very easily. And so I kind of tuned into her as well. So when I wrote the song, Raed messaged me, and he was just so psyched about being in the song, and he said, he always had funny English. He said, "You are the best at all." So whatever, you know, I got it, and to have him say that is just, you know, totally humbling, and I know he's the best, and anyway, those were our last little back and forth, and I just want to say thank you all for being here, because I'm I'm hurting over the death of Raed, and he was a real light, a real hero. He wasn't afraid. He stood his ground. He was a rebel. Not everyone agreed with him, but he wasn't going to conform. He had his own beliefs, and I respect that. And I really respect what he did, how he communicated to us, how he was funny and smart, and he will be a legend in this revolution forever. And I needed to be with people who wanted to talk about him. And I wasn't feeling great. I was at the doctor earlier and just not knowing if I was going to get up here. But Raed he traveled from Syria to Turkey to meet me, so I could drive to Hartford to talk about him. And that's what I have to say about that.
Syrian American Amina Masri talked about the tens of thousands under siege in the desert in Rukban. It's near the Jordanian-Iraqi border, right near a U.S. base.
So, unfortunately, in Syria, the bombing has caused some to flee, and some are displaced within Syria, and those usually get the least attention because we don't hear about them. It's hardly to hear about them. So one of those camps is a Rukban camp. The main important, there's thousands in the camp. Estimated number is from 45 to 70,000. They're all under siege. They have from the north Assad regime forces, and from the south is Jordan, and they have sealed the border to many different reasons. Maybe one of them is Jordan is full of refugees and there is no capacity, but at the same time there's medical cases that we would wish, for the Jordanian just to take attention to them, and then, they can go back to the camp. But unfortunately, nobody's going into Jordan. Another important fact to know is they are from the east side. There's Iraq. And in that area, there's a U.S. base. And this information maybe has not made it to the media. The U.S. base has trained actually I read a couple of articles, trained a couple of nurses and sent them back to the camp so they can contribute. He's just a regular nurse, but obviously because he's the only one, they call him a doctor. And obviously he cannot, do big procedures. So knowing about the location, so you can imagine it. Imagine in this area, which is kind of desert, no aid until the middle of November has been let into the area. The only aid was going in was through people smuggling stuff, and obviously this cost a lot of money. on the people in the camp. So the only aid that was sent in through the UN was in the middle of November, after 10 months of no aid, no food going in, or even medical supplies. So even that one, the regime was delaying it a couple of times. We would hear through SAC that, okay, the convoy is going, and then we hear again that, oh no, it has been delayed. And even then, people were worried that, as in previous situation in, in Douma, in other places that was also under siege, the regime will open up the convoy, take whatever important life-saving equipment, and just let go, let some food in and some very, very basic medical supplies in. So there is 1,460 women, 1,621 men, and 4,273 children. Those are only the medical cases that they need immediate attention. We're talking about, this camp started building in from 2015. And we only made to hear about it now in 2018. So people have been living in this, but now what's the difference is the besiege, it's under siege, nobody's going out or in, and the number has just grown. From Deir ez-Zor, when the bombing happened, people fled there. From ISIS, when they were in Deir ez-Zor, same thing, they fled to this area, and from the other area, Daraa and other places. The emergency response coordinators, aid group, who are in the camp itself, has documented lately 45 deaths due to lack of medical or food or need to be transferred to medical facilities. So one way to help is call, obviously, senators and Congress, and please follow SAC, Syrian American Council. They always have some petition that they're asking people to sign, or it's very easy. They would send you a link, and then you just click on it, and we'll send, the message is written for you to be sent. You just click on it, put your name, automatically you can call your senator or Congress, and we have to just keep talking about the issue.
As I've mentioned before, Rukban is in binocular view of the U.S. base, and our government should be shamed into action. That's our program for today. See you next week at this time. I'm Stanley Heller for The Struggle.